social story is a child-friendly, positive way of giving a child information, social information that they don't currently have. Social stories were invented by Carol Gray, who's an American psychologist, and I have to say these stories work really well for children.
My family is a family of 5, 3 children. Max is 6, Lola's 11, and in the middle of my 2 neurotypical kids is Isabel, 8, who's diagnosed as having Asperger's syndrome. Isabel is very eccentric and she's very colourful and energetic. She loves princesses and Barbies and babies and performing and dancing and singing.
Rapunzel and Belle.
It's about a year now since we've really started using them really regularly and really kind of got our own method going. We've been really pleased and impressed with the stories. Have really worked for Isabel. We love Northallerton Pool and going to Sam Turner's after. For, what do we go for?
Sausages, sausage, beans and toast and chocolate milkshake.
And what does this say?
Yum, I love this.
The best place to start writing a social story is to stop and think about what is the issue that you think that the child is struggling with.
Working on my own, a story for Isabel Walker. My name is Isabel. Miss Wilkinson is my teacher at school. Mrs. Walsh usually helps in class too. Sometimes I do school at home with my mum. Our teachers love to see our work and be impressed with what we have learnt.
So one of our most successful stories is a story called Working on My Own. And really the background to this is Isabel in class. At this point she was only in year 1, so still quite young, but she was not able to sit and complete a task in the classroom, and we had an objective of trying to get Isabel to work on her own for just a 5-minute period. And we also in the story were talking about some of the things that she needs to be able to sit down. So she needs to really clearly understand what it is she's got to do. She really needs to know that if she has a question or a problem that she can put her hand up and ask. And that was really interesting because it turned out that Isabel really didn't understand that she could ask for help at school. She had not appreciated that at all. And when she saw this and we talked about this, she started asking questions at school when she needed help. And that's a big turning point. Collaboration is a really important element of it, whether it's with Isabel or with staff at school or other members of the family.
I can ask for help. This is okay. If I need a break, I can use it.
Using questions that begin with WH, questions like what is happening in this situation? Why is this child struggling in this situation? And how best can we help them? What kind of information do they really need?
Now we're quite established with using the stories, one of the things that I try and do and Isabel enjoys is to sometimes have a bit of input into the story. So she's always been happy to pose for the photographs, but it's nice now sometimes to maybe get her to help with some of the sentences, and she can choose some of the sentences or type them in, and she might type them in a different colour.
The bit I wrote.
Sometimes we might read it on the screen together and she can tell me what she thinks and if she likes things and she doesn't like things. So it's really good to get her involved.
The basic structure of a social story is similar to that of any good story. It has a beginning and a middle and an end and a title that describes what the story's about.
Very often when you might start off with your broad theme, but you've got to really hone it in, and then you're looking for the one sentence really that this story is going to be about, and then that sentence often becomes your title, like taking new medicine. Then I might just write a rough version of it, and I know that I'm going to write quite a few versions because it's going to need to get leaner and leaner and leaner. It starts off quite wordy. Then you might try the story with Isabel and sort of see what her reactions are, or ask her for some ideas to put in it. And then I might finalise it and think it's done and try it for a week, perhaps change it again sometime. So it's a long process.
The use of language in social stories is really important, and we really need to think about the child's level of understanding and their ability when we're writing them, and particularly to make sure that they're not too long so that it holds their attention.
You have to be quite ruthless, I think, with the language and the photographs. You've really, in the end, you've got to only pick things that are really going to work. So you might have things that you thought were really lovely and good, and you've just got to ditch those and be a bit ruthless about it. We try to put lots of language that means something to Isabel in it as well. So we'll often talk in the stories about if she behaves in these ways and achieves the things that we wanted to, that she's going to feel proud, and everybody's going to feel really proud of her.
I like the pictures of me being proud and making everyone else proud.
She understands that emotion and she understands how that feels.
It's best to use literal language, and by that I mean language that can't be misinterpreted or misunderstood. Sometimes, however, you might want to use a phrase that isn't necessarily literal, but it might be very relevant to the child, and those are really good phrases to use at that point.
It's my favourite picture because I'm on fire.
That became a theme that meant that Isabel's been really great at school and she's really focused. She has her own meaning for this, and so this really works for her.
Mr. Walsh used to say I'm on fire.
How did that make you feel, Isabel, when you were on fire?
Really proud.
One of the most important things about writing a social story is keeping it positive, and there are very clear rules about not using negative language in a story. So a social story should not contain words like shouldn't or couldn't or bad or naughty.
We often have to remind Isabel that she can do it because she believes that she can't, and she has to be told in black and white that she can do it and that she's really, really good at things, and that really helps build her self-esteem and confidence to be able to do this. Sometimes you feel worried that you can't do something. Our teachers and our parents only ask us to do difficult things when they know we can do it and we're safe. Trying hard makes us feel proud of ourselves and what we can do. Andrea and Mum are really pleased when I try hard and impressed at what I can do. These are good feelings.
In order to keep the story as positive as possible, Carol Gray came up with the idea of naming some of the sentences in a story. So, for example, there are descriptive sentences, and those are sentences that describe what's happening. The second types of sentences are perspective sentences, and those are the ones that take the perspective of another person. The third type is a coaching sentence, and those are the ones that gently guide or coach a child. The fourth type is an affirmative sentence, and those are reassuring sentences that really help the child to understand the positivity of that story. In terms of getting the balance right of the sentences in the social story, good social stories only have a few coaching sentences in them. No more than a third of sentences in a social story should be coaching sentences.
There isn't a particular way we read them. I suppose we quite often tie it with Isabel reading to me, doing her reading homework with me, and then I'll read this story and maybe another story too. Otherwise we might try and, it would be before an event. We have a story about trying hard at swimming, so we would always read that before her swimming lesson.
When you're introducing a social story, it's a good idea to think very carefully about when and where and how you're going to do that. Again, using the positive theme, we need that to be a lovely, comfortable place where the child's going to enjoy that. It's also important not to read a social story directly following a behaviour that's of concern, because we don't want the child to associate a social story with something negative.
It's really important that the social stories are read on a regular basis, not just at the beginning of the week and then the end of the week. It's the continuity and the regularity of how often they're read that actually make them work. So I used to read it about 3 times a day before a lesson began.
Before we were using the story, we might need to take 16, 17 attempts to get her to sit down and do her work. But once we'd got the story going, we found that we were able to just read the story and then she would sit down and do 5 minutes work on her own.
It's really good if you can tailor a story to a child's interests and the things that they really enjoy doing.
She loves the fact that she stars in these stories, right? And they've got lots of her favourite people and her favourite characters in them. So often it will take ages because you'll have to go off on different paths to talk about Henry VIII, because he's in one of her stories, and she'll start telling you all about Henry VIII. So you've got to go with that a little bit. But that's what makes it work for Isabel, I think.
Always make the social story fun. If it's a good social story, the child will want to read it again and again and will be enthralled by it.
The photographs are really important for Isabel's stories. She loves to star in her stories.
This is my favourite story. These are pictures of me swimming. It helped me learn how to swim more and try hard at swimming.
It's really good if you can maybe make it into a book and laminate it, put photographs in it, possibly do it on a PowerPoint if the child's interested in that kind of thing, or put it into a format, maybe for a younger child on a little placemat, or if somebody's interested in butterflies, for example, you might want to make it in the shape of a butterfly.
The biggest thing that I would say to anyone that's starting out writing social stories is it's hard work. It's going to take quite a lot of time and effort, especially when you first start writing them and you haven't got your process all sorted out.
When you have your first draft of your social story, it's a good idea to go back and edit it. It's really difficult to get it right the first time.
But it really is worth digging in there and persevering. One of the unexpected things about the social stories, I suppose, is the window it's given me on Isabel. Either in the way that it makes me think about her when I'm writing the stories and how I kind of can take apart the problem, or the things that emerge from when you're reading the stories, like the fact that she'd never ask questions and now she asks questions at school. It really has opened up things about Isabel that I didn't know and that I can now go and do something about.
I didn't expect it to work as well as it actually did, to be honest. It worked really well. The difference was unbelievable.
It can be really daunting when you first start writing social stories because it can feel really difficult. However, I've worked with lots of parents and teachers who've written social stories, and one of the things that some parents have said to me in the past is that they begin to think very differently learning to write social stories, and it becomes part of the way that they interact with their children, which is lovely.
A lot of interventions that you learn about when you're dealing with an autistic child, they don't work for Isabel. And I've tried lots of different things and they haven't been effective. Now I've found something that is really effective for her. So that for me is fantastic.
Because they're really good, because they help me. And they're fun.
If you feel like you need more information, there is a manual that accompanies this brief introduction.